this channel. Hello everyone, so I'm going to show you some results we recently obtained on the observation of damage during situ fatigue testing at the synchrotron in SRF Grenoble and in Soleil in Paris. And this work is in collaboration with Rodia Solvay, that is financially supporting this work, and with another colleague from Remetier, which is Chamaro, which is helping us a little bit with the microstructure modeling. I will mostly speak about experimental work and a little bit about microstructure modeling. So the main focus of this work is trying to replace some materials by some polymer reinforced by short fibers, thermoplastics, due to the fact that we have to reduce the weight of vehicles. So it's mostly for automotive industry, and this work was done in the context of a large project involving Toyota, PSA, Rodia as supplier for this material. There are different type of universities and colleagues from also UCL, for example. So it's a wide project, and our objective was more to focus on fatigue mechanisms and fatigue modeling. And today I will mostly speak about fatigue mechanisms. The material we are looking at is short fiber reinforced polymers that is obtained by injection molding. So we obtain plates, and we extract from these plates some specimens which are this shape and at different angles, which is classical if you want to evaluate the effect of anisotropy. And if you look at the microstructures in the thickness, you will obtain such microstructure. With a core shell microstructure, you will have globally, for example, for the zero angle specimen, fibers along the mold flow direction, but in the core of the material, we'll have a small layer, 300 microns of 90-degree material. So it's globally 0-degree angle, but you always have some misorientation in the center of the specimens. Glass fibers, it's 10-micron glass fibers between lengths between 100 and 800 microns, and we did some fatigue testings with classical uniaxial loadings between with loading ratio between -0.5 and 0.7. If you look at the results, you can have different type of representation of your SN data. So you can use standard stress-based approach. You will see that you have a large deviation between 0-degree specimens and 90 and 45-degree specimens. And what we are developing at the lab, it's more energy-based criteria. And if you do that, you will see that you will more easily unify your fatigue data. So you say, okay, it's much better, I can have a criteria that unify my experimental results. But if you look more closely to these results, you can see that you still have a mismatch between the 90, 45, and 0-degree specimen. So there seems something behind, which is the anisotropy of the material that should be considered. So the question is, what are these mechanisms, what are the activation levels of these mechanisms, and do we have damage anisotropy? So what we did is, like everyone, we are looking at the SEM, we are doing some observation of the surface, and you can see some different damage mechanisms: fiber failure, matrix ductility failure in some area of the specimens, cohesive or adhesive failure of the matrix and the fiber interface. But if you do this, you have no idea of the kinetics. You have no idea of how much do I have fiber failure in my materials. The only way to do it, to have this information, is to go to synchrotron and to try to observe the evolution of damage as a function of the stress level, if you look on a uniaxial tensile test, or as a fatigue level, and you do some cyclic loading, and at interrupted test, you do interrupted test, and you look at the microstructure. The key challenge here is to look at the very similar microstructure. So we are going to have, our focus was really to watch the same specimen during a different stage, and the same microstructure. So we did an X-ray microtomography at Synchrotron and Soleil facilities. Here it's the setup we use. It's a fatigue machine that we have been setting up at the lab. You have an electric actuator, you have a load and displacement sensor, and you have the specimen here. And you have here the macrostructure we are monitoring. So you see it's very small, it's just in the center of the material, in the center of the specimen. It's 1.4 millimeter in diameter and more or less the same in height. And The reason why we look at such a small volume is that with the image resolution we are seeking is 0.7 micron. So you cannot have a large volume image. You need to have a very focused area. Our fatigue loading were load control 0.5 Hz, and the result I show you today is in the 5,000 cycle range. Okay, so this is technically the type of mechanisms that we observed during the fatigue testing. This is between the initial state and the final state. Here it's 2,000, a little bit more, 1,000 cycles. And you can see that the first mechanisms we observe is fiber failure. So you can see that progressively, as a function of time, fatigue failure of the fibers occurs. And it's not at once, it takes time. You already have fatigue of the fibers. And you can see here that as the function of time, you are developing more damage, but I will come back on that after. So fiber failure, you could also count these failures. You have damage at fiber ends. So fiber ends damage, you can see it here quite clearly, and then it turns quickly at middle, a bit more than the fatigue life, into small cracks. And these small cracks will join together to progressively create a micro crack. So this is the second type of damage. Third type is debonding. You don't see it very clearly here, but you have debonding occurring here on the fibers. It's quite hard to distinguish because you have phase contrast here, but clearly we observe that parameter. I will show you maybe more clearly next time, but maybe you can see it here quite clearly. Debonding here, and you have small cavitations here that appears. Cavitation. We did some experiments in uniaxial test. I don't show you these results, I have no time, but cavitation was really pronounced in fatigue testing. We did not observe it in quasi-static testing. It's really particular mechanisms of damage that appears for fatigue loading. It doesn't seem to be very critical, but you will see after that it has a role in the other mechanisms. Crazing was also observed to appear. You can see here next to the fiber, small cracking here, which is really similar to what we could observe as for crazing. And you can see maybe that before crazing, you have small cavitation next to the interface between the fiber and the matrix. So cavitation is a preliminary mechanism to other mechanisms, such as crazing. And then you have micro-cracking, so you can here see a fiber that is breaking. You can see initiation of a micro-crack that is propagating within the microstructure. So that's typically the type of mechanisms that we observe, and we can read their kinetics. But the final crack occurrence, or small crack, micro-crack occurrence, appeared by the combination of different mechanisms. This is a typical picture that we obtained. Here you have something which is more or less a crack here. So what do we have here? We have decohesion between the matrix and the fiber. We have cavitation here between those two cavities. You have fiber failure. You have fiber failure at the end of the fiber plus decohesion. You have crazing, and you have cavitation next to the interface that initiates a crack here, a micro crack. So the final crack is really obtained, micro crack is really obtained by the combination of several mechanisms. And this size here is more or less between 30 and 20 micron. It's more or less the size of the spheroids. Okay, so we don't have the image of the microstructure, but we really think it's related to the microstructure behind it. So we did a little bit of microstructure modeling. I will not speak too much about it today, but our aim is more to understand why we observe such phenomena. In particularly, what we observe that where you have close fibers, closely packed fibers, you observe these damage processes. So we did microstructure modeling with periodic microstructures, LFT computations, and we clearly see that in areas where you have compact, fully packed fibers, you have high hydrostatic stresses, you have high principal stresses, you have deviatoric part also. So these stresses and stress distribution promotes all those damage parameters, and what we want to do next is try to relate these kinetics to these local fields in the microstructures. What we are interested also is into the damage quantification. So how we do this, we are splitting the microstructure between the fibers, the matrix, and the damage. The damage is a given range of gray levels. So at the end, you can have the fibers and the damage. 9,000 fibers in the image volume, more than 30,000 damage markers. So you have a statistic here, which is quite interesting. The thing is that when you observe the damage at the end of the fatigue test, you clearly see that you have an anisotropy or differentiations that can be made between 0° angle specimen and 90° angle specimen and 0° angle specimen. So for 0° angle specimen, you see that you have a very high density of damage, high density of microcracks, and a strong core shell effect. You see the density here in the shell is not the same as in the core, as you can see for 90° specimens. But for 45° specimen, this differentiation is not here anymore because you have much more symmetry of the specimen. You don't have this dissymmetry with respect to the loading. So it's more symmetrical, then it's more or less the same in terms of damage, which is quite logical. But when you have this full picture, you cannot separate the whole mechanisms. So what we did is this differentiation of all the mechanisms depending on their shape, aspect ratio, or volume. So we could make a map of damage, and during this map you find the damage that I showed you before: fiber hand, cavitation, decohesion, microcracking, and you can split all your 30,000 damage markers into individual markers and try to have some kinetics or evolution of each one of them. And that's what we did. For example, I show you for microcracking. I tell you for microcracking 0°, we have much more microcracks. From this analysis, effectively, that's what we obtain, which means that for 45 and 90° specimens, we have almost no microcracking, while we have a lot of microcracks at for 0° angle specimens. And the reason is that finally we see that it's very hard to propagate the crack in the 0° layer. And it's very easy in the 90 or 45 because you just have the matrix to go through. You don't have the fibers to go through. So you will fail quickly or transform quickly from a local damage to a complete failure of the specimen at 90 and 45°, while at 0° you need much more energy. I will show you just after this one by looking at the final crack. This is a crack just before failure. The crack that we have been detecting, it was outside the monitor zone, because it's a small chance if you are matching on 1 mm that will catch up with the crack. But by monitoring the macro scale parameters, load and displacement, you can see that something is happening somewhere in the specimen. You can try to track this area and find the crack. This was for the 90° specimen. You can see here, if you look at from the top of the specimen, so you see the crack from the top. You can clearly see that here you have the fiber direction. The crack is propagating more easily in the direction of the fibers that orthogonally to that one. And the crack is not initiating in the 0° layer, but in the 90° layer. And you can see here that the main mechanism that is acting here is decohesion, or it's decohesion between the matrix and the fiber, adhesive or cohesive failure. So this is the main mechanism at 90°. While at 0°, that is a picture of the final crack. You see that you have in the core a lot of damage. This is a 90° layer. So a lot of decohesion between the matrix and the interface. You have a propagation in the core. It's only 300 microns, so you have propagation of damage, but it's constrained in this layer. It's very hard to propagate it in the 90 layer, in the 0° layer, and then the propagation is very hard in that direction. And you can see here that in the core, you observe the crack from the side. So you see it's propagating easily in the direction of the fibers. While if you go in the core, in the shell, you will have much more difficulty to propagate, and you have a lot of dissipation. So it means that you will have propagation in the core, very easy, but then to fail the specimen, you need to go into 0° layer, and then it's very hard. So finally, if I go back to this, and I will conclude on that, if I go back to the macroscopic behavior and the anisotropy that you observe, the anisotropy is due to the fact that you can put much more damage in your 0° angle specimen. So you put much more energy to reach the same fatigue life. And you have a much more dissipative process here in the final crack propagation process. So that's really linked to the degree of dissipation that you need to pattern your specimen to reach the failure of the specimen and experimentally match the observation. We'll not go to all these conclusions, but just to tell you that now we are trying to work on a fatigue modeling that will include all these kinetics and damage that you observed to put it in a unified framework to propose a fatigue prediction model that is microstructurally sensitive to the materials. Thank you very much.